because, if anyone could take notes, even though it's too late, always take notes from Nancy Drew.
Yes, yes.
But to move into Nancy Drew, my goodness, like just
Yeah,
always, you never know where they're gonna go with the plot, and yet it always just works so well. Again, not exactly a bottle episode, but a hostage situation that kind of functions like one.
yeah. When I started the episode, I was like, "Ooh, fun! They're all trapped, and she has to." It's like an escape room with higher stakes, and then the way the story unfolded to be so powerful, I was not expecting.
Hmm.
But if any show could do that, and we've talked about this before, how like each of the mysteries have an element of trauma to them. And I
Mhm.
think this one definitely did, but it spoke to something, um, not that the stories haven't been like realistic, but this one is like they're touching on something super timely and urgent
Mhm.
that's happening in our society. And the way that I don't know, it's just the marriage of what Nancy Drew does as a show and bringing in something super topical. It worked, I think, flawlessly for me, the way that they were able to tell that story.
Yeah, it was so effective. I have to say, I think one of the things we loved the most about early Nancy Drew was when it was more like grounded stories and more like the typical detective kind of show. And of course, we've loved watching it get bigger and more ambitious with all these supernatural stories. So when this happened and it was quite eerie with the camera and everything, you were like, is this supernatural? Is this human driven or whatever? And you got to see the detective work at work. But then the fact that, like Reed said, they brought in such a like topical and timely storyline as well, it was a very human episode. And I think the way they accomplished that with showing you the different characters, the way they felt thing, and making you feel about the main character or the character at the center of the mystery, Dolores, it was just wow. I say this about Nancy Drew a lot, but I don't think I've ever meant it more about this episode than I felt every emotion under the sun in 40 minutes. Incredible episode.
And getting to see it and hear it from Nick's perspective, I think
Hmm.
was especially important.
It was, I think, the way that this is written, um, is difficult. It's supposed to
Yeah.
challenge your assumptions about a narrative. I I didn't check the dates to see when this would have been when they would have written this episode, because there was a period in time in which there were a lot of news stories about Black women who were dying or disappearing within jails, and nothing really being done about it. So this is a reflection of that. But like to have that, but also to pair it with the ways in which when Black women or Black girls go missing, if there is a white person, generally a woman or a girl who's missing, they're going to get sent to the side. And the minute that Nick was like, "Oh, I know why she didn't get what she needed," and she showed it. I was saying, I was like, "She's of color, isn't she? Is she Black?" And she was, and I was like, "Yep, sounds about right to me." And then how we lie to each other, like ourselves as people, the way each person in who's trapped in that jail, with exception to Detective Tamora, who literally just arrived in town, has no idea what's going on, um, just to make themselves feel better, curated a version of Dolores that justified their behavior. And it's like we hear that regardless of the crime all the time, but in this specific scenario in which this woman was slandered in order to cover up minor offenses to a major offense, it was just like that sounds about right too, right? Like the Miss Mitzi, who suddenly Dolores was aggressive, and she's a possible drug dealer, and then she wanted to protect her own children because she was saying that, oh, but if this were to get out, they would be harassed. Like, your children should not be harassed for your behavior, but your behavior is toxic and it can lead to people dying. And that is what happened. Same with, I don't remember Mr. Policy Man, who tried to, I guess he wanted to make it better by going into policy. I have no idea what that man was doing. And then the man who had an affair. But he didn't want that brought to light. So she had to have been drunk. Like the only person who came out of that one clean was Ryan, and because he had alibi after alibi for why he wouldn't have been there. Which, thank you, because I don't need more Ryan
I know.
stuff. I could need him to be like, let's keep him the bumbling biological dad
I
who
know at
has a
first he
rocky
was
past.
their yeah, he was their scapegoat at first. And I was worried at first that he would have contributed to it, but um But yeah, I'm glad it wasn't another Ryan pile on. But yeah, what an episode. What a mystery. Just the way they handled it, I thought was really brilliant.
Yes.
Agreed. Agreed. And I think they used the format of the whodunit or whatever. Like we've seen this played out so many times, but I'm dare I say I've never seen it so done so effectively because like Sabrina said, everyone was lying to make themselves feel better. The spotlight was on Ryan at the start, and you could sense the desperation in everyone else to find to not particularly to blame Ryan particularly, but that once the spotlight was on him, to keep it on him because we'll get out of here and our secrets will be safe. And you're like, were they more desperate to get out of that building alive, or more desperate to keep their reputations intact? Because like Sabrina said, everybody was saying what wasn't true, and there was like, I can't really put into words, but you could just feel it in the writing. I thought it was so effective, and I'll keep saying that word. I'm very, very moved by the whole thing, but Nancy Drew doesn't get the credit it deserves, especially in for an episode like this.
I think the other thing is, to be honest, I don't think these characters thought about Dolores past what happened. They went on with their lives. Like, and it's just, and that is common too. Like, at first, it was a story about a woman who fell through the cracks because of her race. Then, and because of the not having enough resources to be able to handle two cases, then it became a story about a woman where there seems to have been a cover up. And then to expand on what that cover up was, the type of cover up it was just a lot. And I loved Nancy's righteous anger. Like after she asked her dad to, when she realizes what's happening and she asks her dad to trust her, and then she pulls that door closed and she's like, rearm it. And I was like, oh, y'all are in trouble.
Yeah,
I
and
love when Nancy is just pissed. And
yeah.
it wasn't, I feel like at first she was doing this for selfish reasons. She's like, oh, I need to win. I need to, which was an interesting jumping off point from last week because the last thing we saw was Nick saying, I think we lost Nancy. And then they're in this situation. So that wasn't really, I guess, touched upon. But she was kind of doing it just like the way that she always does it. Like, oh, this is a case to win. This is another feather in my cap. Is that a saying? I don't know. But one thing that you can always say about Nancy is that she feels things deeply. She's very empathetic, and she ends up doing things for the correct reasons. Like the way I'm getting chills, the way that she saw how it impacted Nick and let him deal with it. She didn't try to like fix it or like talk to him or anything. She just I think the one I'm chills everywhere. I'm thinking about this episode. When they finally are taking it all in and Nick is looking at the board and seeing how it all came together, she doesn't take her eyes off of him in the background. And I just thought that was incredibly moving that she's just there to listen if he needs it. And then she walks away, and after she kind of like touches him a little bit. I thought that was an important visual to see because the episode I think also plays into a conversation that we had as a country. I don't know how far that conversation went, but like, how do I unknowingly contribute to racism, right? That was a conversation that was had, and all those people in that station told themselves versions of the truth that they could put their hands up and say, I didn't, like, I wasn't, I had nothing to do with that. I'm not racist. But like when Nancy points it out, like, actually, no, you may have not seen it, but like this is how you contributed to this woman and her death that she did not deserve. And yet this episode just chills, so powerful, and sending a message without really being like hitting us over the head with it in a like after school special kind of way, or like very special episode. Like it told the story that needed to be told the way that they excel at telling stories.
It was also important, I think, as far as for Nancy, we've talked about her journey as well. There were a lot of ambiguous people in that route station, and this episode did a lot to highlight how Nancy's reputation had fallen by the wayside and how she was arguably the most ambiguous person of all because of what she had done, recanting the statement for Everett. And I think that's first of all, total badass moment when she was like, "I'm the arbiter now," because she took on this case and she wanted to do right. And I think the conversation she had with the chaplain at the end, where the chaplain said that your actions define who you are. What will people be talking about? I think the fact Nancy remembered who she was when she wanted to take this important case on and get to the bottom of it in such a short amount of time, when nobody showed any effort of wanting to solve it beforehand. I think that went a long way in highlighting who the real Nancy was. And then that created the conflict over what she'd done recently. And how do you come back from that? Like her emotional breakdown at the end of the episode. Again, Kennedy just did a great job going through all those emotions throughout the episode. But my goodness, for being for any other show that does an episode like this with like a robotic voice telling people to do something or get out or you won't get out alive, it's very much an awesome standalone episode. But this did so much work, both in terms of important storytelling, both outside of the show and within the show. Incredible. I feel like every time we start talking, we're going to wrap up with a point like it was amazing, it was incredible. But again, to use that word, effective.
I think so. So one of the great things about Nancy Drew, and especially in this episode, is that these writers know how to be able to center their lead, but also center a supporting character. So like Nancy is very much at the forefront of this episode, but so is Nick. He's like a quiet force through the entire investigation, and he's so open to finding out what is. He's not making any judgment calls. He's not trying to craft a story based on what he assumes happens. He wants the truth. In that moment, when he's basically begging for please just tell me what happened to her. Like what happened to Dolores, and the way the dominoes just fall of how the way each character affected that woman's life to the point that it was no longer in her control. And I already didn't like Hampton because she's the same one who was in the episode with the 5 burning souls plot, who didn't want Nancy to be a part of the case because she had lied. And so I was like, not you again. I already know it's not going to be good for you in this episode. And it wasn't. And to live with the weight of what they had all done, which different degrees of bad things, but then to just go on. Like everyone, like Nancy having to sit with and Nick having to sit with the fact that not only did you push her car into a ravine, you threw her body in the ocean so her family couldn't even lay her to rest. Like the amount of disgustingness that is involved in everything that happened with Dolores. And like, how do you justify that to yourself? Like, I know people do things when they're scared, but like this is beyond fear. That's just, it's a lot. And the sad thing is, you can't really tell yourself that this is just a fictional depiction of real life things, because these real life things happen all the time. They're just not, the case just not always solved. And it makes you think about these cases that aren't solved. I mean, that's one of the reasons why, and this is not a CW show, that's one of the reasons why I think people tune into Alaska Daily, which is that Hilary Swank-led show on ABC. Because I think when it was first promoted, it's really just about her being a high-profile investigative journalist who something happened, and then she moves to Anchorage. But it becomes a show about missing Indigenous women and girls, which is also a topic that's not discussed. Like, we're talking about women and girls of color who are often failed by the system. Dolores and Nancy Drew was failed by the system, and unfortunately her mom was dead, so she couldn't get justice. So thankfully that reverend, who conveniently happened to be an electrical engineer, like was able to get justice for her. Criminally, yes, but these were the type of people that you had to put pressure on in order to get the truth. But I also like that pushes Nancy, after she has a good cry on her fake birthday, to when she writes down Everett's name, it says jail at first, and then jail's not enough, it's justice. So it's whatever justice looks like for her, that's what that man is getting. Nancy Drew was coming for him. And I loved how the episode ended that way, because it felt like, yeah, she put on the white beanie, but that does not mean that she is not still Nancy Drew.
Yeah, she can try on the beanie. Like, she has that right, I think. She can try on different identities. I mean, they need to give the girl a little bit of room her life changed. She found out that actually you don't know who you are or where you came from. And I think she needs to have time to grapple with that. And Granted, she hasn't had a ton of time to do that because she's been dealing with French ghosts inside her best friend and like other people dying and the historical society doors open. Like there's just been so much that like that's being pushed to the background. And there are so many instances where she can actually give that attention. But I think she did remember who she is in this one, whether it's a fake birthday or Nancy's not what her name was supposed to be, or she's not a real Drew. I think she kind of remembered. And on that note, I really loved when the arbiter is like, Carson Drew's coming up, you better get him out of here. He's gonna be the first to die. And she picks up the phone and she yells at him. I was like, I know that's code. I know that's code, and I know that's code. And I was so happy when Carson knew what she was saying. Oh, I love that. I love that she can talk in riddles like that, and she has somebody that understands what she's meaning. Like I love Nancy so much. Like the fact that she can do that and think on her feet that well, I'm just like, oh my God, you should be president or something. I don't know.
And the episode was really important like that because I think her actions not just taught us, but taught her who she was. It reminded her of who she was. And the fact that like Carson knew who she was, even when she was giving that like horrible message to him, it just, that is who Nancy Drew is. And I thought that was very poignant and striking what you said, Sabrina, that Nancy Drew is coming forever, because I feel like she now knows who she is. She's remembered who she is. And she
And
may have
beyond like knowing who she is, she remembered why she does what she does. It's
yeah.
to help people and to bring light the injustices and traumas that people go through that don't get solved. Like she's always the one that's like, oh, a cold case, in 5 minutes I'll crack it and I'll get these people justice. And I think that's what's really important. Sometimes like, I mean, there's layers of it that's kind of like, why is it this young white woman that's doing this for people? But I do think it's really important that her reasoning for doing what she does is becoming less selfish and more selfless, and that's her purpose drives her. And I'm glad that she remembered that in this episode.
And she's getting more and more attached to the stories that she deals with, because we did say at the start that Nancy was a little bit, the mission's the important thing here, solve the case at what cost. But like even with the Lost Souls episode that we watched the last week, you saw how attached she got to the little girl she was helping. This week you saw how important it was to her to help get justice for Dolores. So I think that, again, I'll go back to the whole actions speak louder than words. Nancy is remembering who she was, and I think that's why she had that sudden like breakdown when she realized what she'd done, because that was an action as well, and that was the action that forced her to lose herself, because she was caught up in the whole I can have a relationship with Celia here, I could be a Hudson maybe. And then now that the novelty of that's worn off, she's remembering the like gravity of what she actually did, which I think is driving her forward to get more justice for more people and remember who she truly is. Because regardless of what her real last name might be, Nancy Drew will always be who she is.
And it was her dad's too that kind of gave her that nudge, because at the police station, Ryan was like, 1 down, 12 to go.
Yeah.
And then as she's slicing into her birthday pie, which was an interesting choice of it was looking like a pumpkin pie and whatever. I guess it was November. I won't drag it too much. But they asked how Nancy got her name. I think it was Bess that asked that, and Carson is kind of explaining why her mother chose her name, and she just like, Kennedy was so evocative, is that a word, in that scene where she just like kind of emotionless. You can't read what Nancy's thinking, but she stops cutting the pie and she's like, I didn't change. And then she just walks out and sobs. Because I think the weight of there's also a pressure on her too, right? To do all these things to get justice for people. And I think in that moment it just all came tumbling down. She was like, I just did this and everyone's counting on me to do this. And I love that she was strong enough to be like, I have no choice but to do this.
Yeah, I think so. I partly like that scene. There's a moment of it I don't quite like, and that's only because I can't seem to escape Abraham Lincoln. Whenever there's an episode about Black people, we always have to evoke the man. But I will say that I thought it was a beautiful remember who you are moment. To that not only did her parents and still do love her immensely, but there was a weight to the name that they gave her. Like it wasn't just random. It is like they wholeheartedly just pulled her into their lives. And then they christened her Nancy after her mother's weird obsession with Abraham Lincoln, therefore named after his wife. But because of the speech, the Gettysburg Address. And what is it? They named her that because she's their better angel. And I was just like, oh, Nancy, right in the feels on the fake birthday. I was like, your father really truly came hard with that one. It was very subtly, I felt Lion King, except without without Mufasa saying, remember who you are. But it really did trigger sort of like a cleansing in her. Like I thought, to be honest, the ace might have been coming up to the stairs. That's not what happened, but it's just because he stared while she was walking away and
I
the door
had the
was
same
open.
thought. I know. At first I thought when the camera panned forward to her and there was a door behind her, I thought Ace was gonna come through the door. And then when it panned again, I was like, oh, she left the bedroom door open, which was that was her bedroom door, right? That was open. So the other door was the closet or bathroom or something. And I was like, oh, okay. Well, I mean, the scene still works, but like
It does.
always just looking out for those nice moments.
True.
Can we talk about Ace a little bit? Because
Yeah.
he had a journey of his own with George's great aunt May. He was so cute in those glasses.
Talk about balancing the B plot that's operating more like a C plot type of story. Again, I mean, Nancy Drew writers, I have no idea if you're doing clinics or workshops, but like, let me know. I will sign up because the balancing was so good. You have this really heavy storyline with Nancy and Nick about Dolores, and then you have this lighter but not as light story with George and her great aunt, and just the way that like they're playful in but she's carrying the weight of not going to go see her. And her aunt has this great line that I really loved. It was, it's not a path forward if it's not going anywhere. It's a hole in the ground. And I was like, ooh, auntie spicy but true. I loved it.
Yeah, I love the we have a little dose of levity in the middle of it that didn't feel like over the top. It didn't feel like they crammed it in. It felt really natural to have Ace have the spirit in him with these glasses on, which is visually like it's funny. It's right, it's funny. But there was still a weight to that storyline where George had got to have her moment and then realized that like, oh yeah, I'm in trouble. And that when Ace comes back into his body, when George says, just please don't tell anybody that like Odette's taking over, he was crying.
Yeah. Alex, who plays Ace, I have to say that was he's such a great emotive actor, because like you were like, were the tears coming from Aunt May beforehand, or was it coming from him? And you knew they were coming from him. He can really say so much with saying so little, because let's be honest, Ace doesn't use his words a lot. You can kind of see what's going on in his face. And oh, that a beautiful scene. Ace is quickly becoming everybody's rock, and very few people want to admit that outside of Bess. But he cares so much about everyone, and he's there for everyone. And people they'll use him for that, but they won't necessarily like always give him the credit. I just wanted to take a moment to give him the credit, because Ace is always
AC.
there.
I love the men on the show, particularly Ace and Nick. 10 out of 10. Yeah. 11 out of 10. Just the greatest male characters on the CW. Well, we've been planning that episode. Just to heads up to listeners, we're planning that episode, and Nick and Ace will get their flowers.
Yes, the best CW characters. I think this is very much Nancy's episode, but it was also Nick, Ace, and George's as well. I think that the plot with George was subversive, because it starts as, I assume that wasn't a great aunt that she didn't care for. And because of how she pops up out of Ace, she's like, face round like a mooncake. And I was like, ma'am.
Like, coming in swinging, coming in hot.
Yes. But I actually like, no, there's deep love between the two of them. And one thing I absolutely adore about Nancy Drew is that love on this show is not elevated by degree of romance. Like the love is very deep in all the relationships, regardless if it's romantic, platonic, or familial. There's just an important weight given to all of the dynamics on the show. And even with poor Odette, I kind of loved that they didn't have Mary be a woman who mourned for the rest of her life because they were young. And so, I mean, Auntie didn't have, who said that Odette was a footnote? Because it wasn't okay. but like, but the reality of it being that Odette was a great love of her life, but she went on to love again and to have a wonderful life and be surrounded by family. That's a better story for Mary than to have been alone for however many years and be lost in the spirit realm the way that Odette is.
And again, the show does such a good job of making you feel things in a short amount of time, because you completely understood why Odette felt crushed like that. And then per Bess, you could see the tears in her eyes as well, because she was rooting for Odette as well. So I mean, like, even when the storylines don't have an awful lot of time to work with, they have an awful lot of story to work with. And that one, you couldn't help. Odette's been such a pain in the neck for so long, but you couldn't help but feel for her regardless.
I know, poor Odette. She is gonna have to like book it out of George's body though. Like,
Yeah,
I do
TikTok.
like her.
It's crunch time.
It's crunch time. Like,
interest is waning.
Also, with the line on the
this is true.
lifeline is
Now we have a deadline. We have stakes now. It's the truth will come out, because anything that George tries to keep secret usually doesn't for very long.
Speaking of people that need to go, not that I dislike Detective Tamora, but I don't really know what he's adding for us other than
I know that one, the what was the episode, the lust episode, I was kind of like, oh, I kind of like him now, and then in this one I was kind of like, I'm over it. He's fine, but he's not bringing much to the table. Sorry to that man.
But yeah, when he used to be antagonistic, that served a purpose. He suddenly became a lustful object for Nancy. That served a purpose. Now he's kind of like the good person.
And the punching bag.
There. Exactly, yeah. I don't really know what he's adding to the story. I don't know, like, Nancy's got the thing going with Gil at the moment. We know she's heading in the east direction slowly but surely. I don't really know what Detective Tamura's purpose is anymore, other than being the lawman of the town. And now that he's promised that the police station in the town will do much, much better to make up for the horrendous way that Dolores was treated, maybe there'll be a purpose there. But he is just kind of coming across like one-dimensional lawman now, so much so that he had to kind of be written out of the scenario, even though he was at the heart of it.
I know. And then, like, Nancy did not need him there. Like, he asserted himself as being a detective. And then she looked at him and she was just like, oh, Nick's a car guy. And like, as she was explaining why she wasn't going to him with it. And I was like, Nancy, this man is not of use to you. Like, we're too advanced. I mean, besides, like, possibly if she needed a warrant of some kind, like she needed the ability to sneak up into anywhere. But I'm just like, you know what? We can just remove the law enforcement from the equation because they seem to impede her anyway.
Yeah, I feel like it'll take a step back a little bit. But the beginning of the episode when Nancy was arrested, it reminded me so much of Veronica Mars, which I don't like comparing the show to Veronica Mars, because obviously Veronica Mars wouldn't have existed without Nancy Drew in the beginning at all. But just the tone of the characters, like Nancy in her handcuffs, like not taking it seriously. It was such a Veronica Mars thing.
When she
like,
told him she
giving
put
lip
back on
to the
Yeah.
giving lip to the sheriff, like that's so Veronica Mars.
It is I can solve the mystery handcuff. That's fine. Which would be more comfortable for you?
Oh, if anybody that doesn't watch Nancy Drew made it this far, I think just watch this episode, season 2, episode 14. You don't need to know what's going on in the rest of the season. It's a spectacular episode. You will be entertained. You will be moved. Please watch it. It's so good.
It's just an excellent episode of television, not just on CW, just period.
Yeah. I remember when seeing something, when an actor talking about a soap once, and they said that when handled right, television can tackle issues and raise awareness about things far better than politicians or famous people can. And I think that Nancy Drew episode is an example of that. It tackled something topical and important that it isn't being talked about enough, and did it in an incredibly effective manner. outstanding episode, and I know we praise this show constantly, but I feel like this episode stood out among the rest. Amazing.
I mean, we praise it so much though because it's deserved.
Mm-hmm.
It is truly, if enough people had watched it, it would have went down as one of the best shows that have ever aired on television. It's just a freaking masterpiece. I just don't know how else to describe it. Just wow.
Yeah. Retweet, underline, bold, in italics.